Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. We'll be exploring the teachings of Zarathustra today. With me is Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, who is on the Faculty of Philosophy at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. He is also the author of Prometheus and Atlas. Welcome, Jason.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Jeffrey.
Likewise. Many people today have heard the name Zarathustra. It comes up in popular culture here and there, but very few people, I think, in the Western world really know much in detail about who Zarathustra was, what he taught, and why he's important today. So perhaps we could begin our discussion of his teachings by grounding people a little bit in who this person was.
Well, Zarathustra is probably most famous on account of Nietzsche, who had adopted him as his mouthpiece in his greatest work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And Richard Strauss composed a great orchestral piece on the basis of Nietzsche's book and further popularized Zarathustra. Voltaire considered him the religious prophet most suited to the spirit of the age of Enlightenment. Of course,
meaning 18th century Europe.
Yes, of course, Voltaire referred to him as Zoroaster, which is the Greek version of his name.
I see. So some of the leading thinkers in Western culture admired Zarathustra or Zoroaster as perhaps for them the most important spiritual teacher in philosophical history.
Yes, and in The Magic Flute, Mozart highlights that aspect of Zoroaster or Zarathustra that is associated with magic, alchemy, and the occult.
I see. And of course, in Christianity, you have the three wise men, or the three magi, who seem to know in advance about the birth of Christ.
Yeah, the Magi are the Zoroastrian priests. It comes from the word moran, which became magus in magoi plural, or magus singular in Greek.
Yes.
This is where we get the term magic from. Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, was known as the founder of the Order of the Magi. And
also, as I understand it in Christianity, they're sometimes referred to as three kings.
Yeah, this is a corruption. I don't know how this evolved, but it's very clear in the Greek original of the New Testament that they're magoi, that they're Zoroastrian or Mithraic priests who've come from the Persian Empire.
I see, but I also, now I'm making reference to Plato's ideal of the philosopher king seems to be echoed in that.
Very interesting. That is something that we should discuss in the context of the Zoroastrian political philosophy.
Okay, well, let's cover some of the teachings. And I understand there are 7 major principles to Zarathustra's teachings.
They're often called the bounteous immortals, but that word being translated as bounteous really means progressive, spenta, amesha spentas. And I think of these as the 7 things that don't change in cosmic order, which allow for all progressive evolution.
And when you say progressive, I know that's a word widely used in contemporary American politics. There's probably a similarity there, actually, in terms of looking toward the future.
Well, there was hardly any notion of progress in pre-modern societies.
No.
And probably every trace of a notion of creative evolution that you can find goes back to Zarathustra or the Persians in some way. Zarathustra is the first person to break out of the mold of a cyclical view of time and history, where we're constantly declining from a golden age in the past, and a golden age that will simply repeat itself after everything has declined and degraded.
Now, when you say he's the first person, I suppose it's useful to provide some sort of a date as to when he lived and taught.
There are some debates about this, but Zarathustra is at least 1500 BC, which puts him far before the rise of Greek philosophy, before Gautama Buddha, and long before Christ.
Okay. So another one of the prominent teachings is reverence for truth and wisdom.
Yes. Well, the first of these unchanging primordial principles is the very idea of the progressive mentality itself. Spenta menu is the primary quality of Ahura Mazda, or the Lord of Wisdom. And the idea is that through his mind, he guides creative evolution in the cosmos. It seems to be the first notion of intelligent design that we have in literature. And so truth, what's often translated as truth and what plays a central role in ancient Persian culture, Asha, actually means cosmic order. So the idea is that implicit in the cosmos is a certain order that's been thought out by a rational mind. And it's associated with fire, with an undying fire. We can align ourselves with this cosmic order through cultivating what's called the good mind, vohu mena. And this word vohu mena eventually evolves through the history of the Indo-European languages into humana and humanitas in the Latinate branch, a central ideal in Greco-Roman and Renaissance culture. The implication being that the properly human being is the one who's cultivated his mind.
There's an awful lot in there. We could unpack a great deal in what you just said. I mean, to understand the last 2 minutes could take almost a lifetime, I think. So I have a few things I'd like to interject, if I may. One is the highest deity is Ahura Mazda.
That's right, the Lord of Wisdom. And this word Ahura is a cognative Ashura. In Sanskrit, in the Hindu religion, the Ashuras are the Titans. So what's taking place when Zarathustra turns Ashura Mazda, or the Titan of Wisdom, into his chief god, is an inversion of the Indo-European pantheon.
Because the Greeks said that the Titans came before the gods and were overthrown by the gods of Olympus.
Well, the Greeks and the Hindus both demonize the Titans, who are in a battle against the gods. Whereas Zarathustra flips this and says that the gods are promulgators of deceit, intent on manipulatively oppressing humanity and tyrannizing over us, whereas the Titans serve the cause of Lord Wisdom.
And let me just mention one other thing of parenthetical interest. Ahura Mazda. The name Mazda is also associated with a Japanese automobile, and that's not an accident.
No, the founder of the Mazda car company deliberately named his company after Zarathustra's god. And in fact, the logo of the Mazda car company is a more stylized form of this. This is the Fravashi, or Farbahar, the perfected form of the human soul. What state of embodiment we are able to attain at the end of history on the other side of this creative or progressive evolution.
Which is another important teaching.
That's right.
The idea that the soul is eternal, is that right?
Well, the soul is eternal but evolving. And so, you know, the idea that we learn in successive phases and that we need to continually cultivate our minds is at the core of Zarathustra's teaching.
And this idea of constant evolution is also related to the significance of fire as a central symbol.
That's right. The undying fire is the symbol of cosmic order, or truth, Asha. And interestingly, it was adopted by Heraclitus, who is the first person in Greek philosophy to forward this idea of cosmic order. He was invited by King Darius to become the court philosopher of the Persian Empire, and you can find many traces of Zoroastrian influence in the fragments of his writings that survive.
And I know in an earlier interview that we did a year ago, we talked about how Greek philosophy basically was born because these philosophers such as Heraclitus and the other pre-Socratic philosophers emerged from the portions of Greece that were ruled by the Persian Empire.
Another huge sign of Persian influence on the Greek philosophers is the concept of philosopher kingship, which was anathema to the political forms that the Greeks actually practiced, whether that was democracy or oligarchy or hereditary aristocracy. Plato's concept of philosopher kingship was influenced both by Heraclitus and by Pythagoras, And we've talked about Heraclitus' relationship with Iran briefly. Pythagoras spent a decade in the capital of the Persian Empire. Plato becomes a Pythagorean and absorbs the idea of the guardianship of the wise, or the leadership of a society by thinkers, from Pythagoras. This brings us to another of the Ameshaspentas, the idea of desirable dominion, or the right form of government, Kshatravarya, or Shahrivar in more contemporary Persian. This is the idea that an ignorant mob ought not to be making important decisions for the whole of society. And at the same time, the caste system, which Hinduism preserves and which was part of the primordial Indo-European culture that Zarathustra is emerging from out of, the caste system ought to be rejected. There's a profound message of social justice in the Gathas, or hymns of Zarathustra.
And the Zoroastrian religion that Zarathustra founded, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but became the dominant religion of several of the great Persian empires.
That's right. So the Persian empires, especially the first one, embody this idea of Shahrivar, or desirable dominion, the idea of wisdom and the pursuit of truth being the basis of proper governance. You see in the ancient Persian inscriptions, Darius say things like, "May Ahura Mazda protect this country from the enemy, from droughts, and from the lie." He includes the promulgators of deceit as people who bring about calamities on a scale with famines and droughts and foreign invasions.
Now, we have in Christianity, and I think to some extent in Judaism, a notion of the struggle between good and evil, and the figure of Satan as an evil figure who is somehow divine but not part of the Godhead, essentially. This sense of duality, I think, is more clearly expressed in Zoroastrianism.
Yes, the rival of Spentamainu, or the progressive mentality, is something that Zarathustra calls Angramenu, or the constricted, constrained mentality. That root there, Gera, suggests being knotted up. And it also, in Angra, you can hear the English word angry. So this is a polar opposite to Spentamainu. And what it suggests is that Ahura Mazda is not omnipotent. And so our free will is central to human cultural evolution.
So the notion, which I think is sort of implicit in much of Western culture, although most people don't realize it's a Zoroastrian notion essentially, is that there's a cosmic battle going on between these forces of wisdom and these forces of darkness, and the humans are part of the battlefield, and we have free will. We can choose.
Yes, Ahura Mazda calls human beings into this world as champions of the truth. There's an idea that we volunteered, to be incarnated in this existence, to fight this cosmic battle against the forces of darkness, deceit, and retrogression, or constraint.
I think theologically speaking, it's much clearer than in Judaism or Christianity, where Satan is sort of this shadowy figure and we don't know why he's here or how he got there.
That's right. There's a tremendous emphasis on personal conscience in Zoroastrianism.
Now, one of the other great principles, as I understand it, is the enunciation of ecology.
Yes, so one of the ways in which this battle against the forces of deceit and the enforcers of ignorance, one of the ways that battle is prosecuted is through cultivating the earth. The Gathas, the hymns of Zarathustra, begin with the soul of Mother Earth crying out for some protector, for someone to save her from the plunderers who are ravaging the earth, and the mumbling priests who sanctify the rule of these warlords. So you see Zarathustra repeatedly emphasize that agriculture is one way of promoting righteousness, and it's not accidental that this became the basis of the construction of what are called qanats, or kanats, large underground channels that bring water from aquifers into very arid regions of the Persian Empire, so that you could have gardens growing where you'd never imagined they'd be possible. These gardens were referred to as paridaesa, which is the source of our word paradise.
Oh.
And the idea was that we can turn this earth into a paradise. We can improve upon nature and perfect existence.
It's a utopian vision.
That's right. It's a utopian vision. And this brings us to two very closely connected Ameshaspentas. One is Amordad, or Ameratat in Zarathustra's dialect. And this means, it's often translated as immortality, but it really means vitality and the furtherance of life. And that's associated with the growth of vegetation. The other one is Horvatat, which means wholeness or health. And it's associated in particular with water. So the idea of health and vitality is bound up with cultivation of the earth and the promotion of a settled agricultural way of life, as opposed to one based on plunder and conquest.
Now, earlier you referred to Mother Earth, using the feminine.
That's right.
And of course, many ancient cultures worshipped female deities associated with the earth and with agriculture. Is that part of Zoroastrian teaching?
Very much so. And one of the Ameshaspentas, Spenta Armaiti, is specifically referred to as feminine, Spandarmat in more contemporary Persian. And this is devotion, serenity, or love. The idea being that the more you align your thoughts, your words, and your deeds, the more unity of purpose and focus you have on seeking truth, the more you become inwardly settled, the more a calm settles over you and over a justly governed society. So this Ameshaspenta has a feminine aspect. It's also noteworthy that in ancient Persian society, women had a far more significant role than probably in any other pre-modern society. You had female naval commanders in the Persian Empire, women who were the owners of large estates. And the Greeks even made fun of the ancient Persians, really, for being under the thumb of their women.
That would suggest something very almost contemporary, with the emphasis on feminism, the emphasis on ecology, the emphasis on progress. It's not what we normally associate with the ancient empires of this planet.
Well, the respect for women has to do with Zarathustra's emphasis on the individual. You see in the Gathas, Zarathustra referred to men or women, or men and women repeatedly. And in particular in the little vignette where he is officiating at his youngest daughter's wedding, you see how he honors her choice of her own husband and refers to her, addresses her very respectfully.
Now, you use the term gathas. It sounds like Gita, as in Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, it's a cognate. Zarathustra's language is almost identical to the oldest form of Sanskrit. So Gatha means the same thing as Gita, song or hymn.
So we're talking historically speaking about the very earliest Indo-European culture.
Indeed. Indeed, it may even be the case that Zarathustra's revolutionary message, which inverted the Indo-European pantheon, was the cause of the breakup of the Indo-European community into the Indians and the Europeans who migrated in different directions, so that they could maintain their more pagan religion and their cyclical conception of history.
But there's this sense that he's a reformer, that there's something in the existing religious culture that he finds deceitful, that he feels people need to stand against.
That's right. It's interesting because on the one hand, Zarathustra, on a number of occasions, says that he is going to tell us something unheard of. He's aware of the sense in which his message is unprecedented and something new, which by itself is very peculiar in literature that's that archaic. But on the other hand, there are repeated references to him being a reformer of an existing tradition that has somehow been corrupted, and how those who have perverted it are manipulating people and oppressing them.
Are there other important principles that we need to review?
No, I think we really discussed all of these unchanging fundamental principles which govern all progressive evolution, both in the cosmos and in a justly governed society.
Mm-hmm. And this religion was unique in the ancient world insofar as, for example, it abolished slavery.
Well, this goes back to the idea of vohumana, or humanism.
Mm-hmm.
So, people who are living under conditions of slavery are not in a position to cultivate their minds, mm-hmm. which means that they don't fulfill their human potential. And affording people the opportunity to be humanized is at the core of Zarathustra's teaching, mm-hmm. and was the basis of the administration of the Persian Empire.
When we think of the Persian Empire, I'm going to throw you a curveball, if I may. I know that it's been conquered many times by other cultures. There's a tragic history to it. There have been many different Persian empires, as I understand it. And I think most people know about the great conflicts with Alexander the Great and the Greek traditions. And yet, each time the empire seems to over time come back.
Yeah, it does. And perhaps this means that Spentamenu is winning in mm-hmm. the battle against the forces of ignorance and deceit. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Spentamenu is
the progressive mentality.
The progressive mentality. It's associated with the deity Ahura Mazda.
It's the chief attribute of the deity Ahura Mazda. It's mm-hmm. Ahura Mazda as the first of the Amesha Spentas, and these other unchanging principles are emanations or powers of Ahura Mazda.
And the opposite of Spentamenu is Angrimenu.
That's right, the constraining or constricted mentality mm-hmm. who promulgates deceit and is responsible for people being able to oppress others and manipulate them tyrannically.
And is also associated with the deity Ahriman.
Well, Ahriman, the deity Ahriman, is a contraction in Middle Persian of Angrimenu.
I see. So Angrimenu is both a deity of darkness, and a principle.
Yeah, so, any deity who operates in a fashion consistent with the promulgation of deceit and the constraint of evolution mm-hmm. would be then an expression of Angrimenu.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this. We mentioned in the beginning that Voltaire, one of the great European philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, felt that Zarathustra was a better instructor of enlightened thinking for humanity, better than Christ.
Right.
Why did he think that?
Well, because the message of the New Testament is rather schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, you have a gospel of love and compassion, and on the other hand, you have an affirmation of the Old Testament. Jesus at one point says that not a dot of an I or a cross of a T from the Torah will pass out of existence or become irrelevant until the end of the world. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, Exodus or Leviticus, there are some very harsh laws in there. And in particular, the conquest of Canaan mm-hmm. was actually, a genocide of the native population, mm-hmm. Putatively under the direct command of the Lord.
Yes.
And in coordination with the army of the Lord mm-hmm. through, the use of magical devices like the Ark of the Covenant. Mm-hmm. I think that if Zarathustra could see how Jehovah operated, he would probably identify him as an expression of Angrimenu or mm-hmm. Ahriman, mm-hmm. which is interesting because Cyrus the Great, the Persian emperor, whose humanism and cosmopolitanism reflect Zoroastrian teachings, winds up becoming identified as a savior of the Jews. He mm-hmm. liberates them from Babylon and commissions the construction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem.
And I believe is referred to in the Bible itself as a Moshiach, or Savior.
He's the only historical figure referred to as Moshiach.
Mm-hmm. One can say then that in ancient times, the Persian Empire, which lasted for centuries, had extensive discourse with the Jews, with the early Christians, with the Buddhists and Hindus, and with the Greek philosophers as well, so that much of our culture is derived from the teachings of Zarathustra, though we may not recognize it today.
That's right, and I think we can excavate various elements of Zarathustra's worldview from out of all of these traditions. That's something that's beginning to take place in Iran today.
Well, today Iran is referred to as the Islamic Republic. Islam, Muhammad specifically, conquered a Zoroastrian empire.
That's right. And the Parsis of India are Zoroastrians who refused to convert to Islam and took refuge ultimately in Bombay. So often people associate Zoroastrianism only with the orthodox form that's been preserved by the Parsis. But in fact, a great deal of Zoroastrianism was simply absorbed into what became Sufism, and we can also extrapolate certain elements of Zarathustra's teaching from some of what's now referred to as Islamic mysticism. In a sense, a more living and dynamically evolving variant of Zoroastrianism remained in Iran than the static form that wound up being fastidiously preserved by the Parsis.
And I suppose it's fair to say that Western humanism also has been influenced by the teachings of Zoroaster.
Indeed, because Mithra is the savior figure of Zoroastrianism. One thing that we didn't touch on was this idea of a linear and progressive history also implicates the coming of a future savior toward the end of history. And this savior figure in particular is identified as Mithra, who becomes Mithras, and the cult of Mithras actually rises to dominance in the Roman Empire. It's embraced by most of the Roman legionaries before Christianity is made the official religion of the empire. So through the vehicle of Mithraism, Zoroastrian ideas deeply influenced Roman and subsequent medieval European culture.
And I gather that the choice of the Emperor Constantine to convert his entire empire to Christianity was in part a desire not to have his army under the sway of a religion that came from his neighboring competitive empire.
That's right. Rome and Iran were the two great rival superpowers of the time, and to have the Roman military convert to the religion of the Persians represented a grave national security threat.
Well, we're going to have more interviews in which we'll talk about this ancient history more, and we'll talk about the influence of Zarathustra's teachings in contemporary society, the legacy of Zarathustra as well. Jason, Reza Jorjani, thank you so much for being with me.
It's been a pleasure being with you again, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with us.